Darren here, and today, a white whale. I'm finally taking a crack at one of my favourite bands of all time, that being The Fall. And when I say taking a crack at The Fall, that doesn't really begin to cover it. This is my fourth attempt at this. I've abandoned, I've binned all the others. I just couldn't frame what I wanted to say in a way that worked for me. So I went back and I rewatched my Wire primer videos. And honestly, that seems to be the only way I can make this work without it turning into some multi-part mini-series, Prestwich Alexanderplatz. No, I'm not going there. So the first of two episodes, this one covering The Fall from 1978 to 1989, which will feature 20 tracks, a mixture of, gotta haves and my own favourites, that hopefully tell at least some of the full story and also provide an entry point for people who are new to the band. Fall fans, they can be kind of rabid completists, and no doubt there will be several serious omissions on my part. So some ground rules to make things easier. I'm looking at studio releases only. That's no live or session tracks. I won't be considering any of the band's cover versions, originals only. I won't be ranking. I don't do rankings, don't do tier lists, all that crap. I never will. This list will be approximately chronological. And also, finally, no apologies. If it's a toss-up between, a classic and a personal favourite, then I am backing myself, because really it's the only way to roll. Okay, onwards, and at number one on my list from the band's 1979 debut album Live at the Witch Trials, and not a live album, I've got Industrial Estate. I'm skipping the band's first two singles here. That's It's the New Thing and Bingo Master's Breakout in favour of this track. It's, I think, the most identifiably early Fall sounding track on this album. A blaring, gaudy, funfair ride, garage punk nursery rhyme, which manages to sneak in a fake ending despite being only 2 minutes long. A squawking klaxon guitar riff, dinky seesawing Joe Meek kind of organ figures, bustling drums with crazy little rolls squeezed in, and Mark E. Smith at his speedy, haranguing, sinusy best, bemoaning the industrial estate. That's the soulless industrial parks that kept the manual working classes employed, imprisoned if you like, the length and breadth of the country. This song is a willfully unschooled, braying terrace chant of a song, and a choice airing for Mark's proletarian poet lyrical style. Scathingly dismissive of middle-class pseudo-intellectualism, rowdy, peeved, a mix of kind of sawn-off erudition and just chippy piss takes. Mark was an autodidact set to auto-destruct. An acknowledged classic, and I think one of the grittier cuts on the kind of the cleaner sounding Witch Trials album. At number two, I've got Roche Rumble. This is the group's third single from October of 1979, and I think this might have been my first exposure to the music of The Fall. It featured on the Enemy Indie City compilation in late 1988, around about the same time as I bought the Frenz Experiment. And this was also about the same time of the broadcast of the Sonic Youth Fall Covers Peel Session, the infamous Peel Session, which I think went out in about October of 1988. I honestly can't remember which of these I would have heard first, but either way, Roche Rumble is another early Fall classic. These pounding Apache-style toms accompany Mark until a tumble of instrumentation, jittery guitars and bass, these wheezing, kind of faltering organ lines, they join him. And the lyric concerns the widespread Valium consumption required by many to get through their, miserable daily grind, with the Roche, that's the Roche, chemical pharmaceutical company, attracting most of Mark's venom. He sings menopause wives are hard to handle, no cultural love, no gambles, the dull manage, especially smashed on Roche Rumble. Elements of the main riff, the chords of Roche Rumble, are apparently heavily influenced by the Stooges' Shake Appeal from Raw Power. I gave it a listen myself, and maybe. But Mark and the band were, they were inveterate thieves, so this isn't a shock, really. Okay, third up, a track now, I think, from what is their first end-to-end classic album, that album being Grotesque, after the Gram, released in November 1980. And number 3, I've got New Face in Hell. And both this and the next track, I think, are fine examples of how, the Fall's influence spread far and wide. It takes one listen to New Face in Hell, and all the lo-fi music lovers out there should be nodding appreciatively and uttering the words "conduit for sale," because this is the blueprint for that early Pavement sound, and probably as brazen a lift as anything that Smith, Riley, Hanley and Scanlon, ever had a go at. If you ever thought that Mark's constant plagiarist's shtick in the music press, was just overcooked, over cocky grumpiness, then this might provoke a little self-reflection. But at the same time, there is a phrase, was it Oscar Wilde, T.S. Eliot? I can't remember. Something about talent borrows, genius steals. I don't think the Fall could really complain, given the amount that they lifted from their own influences. A New Face in Hell is this shuffling 2-chord vamp, drenched in crackling organ, kazoo, and Mark's 19 to the dozen spiel, punctured only by him, yelping the title every once in a while. It is glorious. And there's more influence afoot, I think, sonically this time, at number 4 with Prole Art Threat from the Slates EP from April of 1981. On this track, I hear strong pre-echoes, I guess, of that atonal, crushing swarm of guitar noise that early sonic youth would deploy. Not a straight lift by any means, but it does kind of show a stylistic line connecting UK post-punk and, that New York no-wave sound. Yet gnarly, detuned, cross-tuned guitars meshing into these lumpy shapes. Think of a Sonic Youth song like Death Valley 69. This is something I've picked up on anyway. But this song, and much of Slates, actually demonstrates quite how lyrically daring and structurally complex Mark was beginning to get. If you check out the entry for this song at the annotated Fall website, there'll be a link to that in the description, you can get a full breakdown of the lyric, and it reads essentially like a piece of avant-garde theatre. There's a narrator, there are multiple characters shifting perspectives, but he kind of hammers it into this clanging post-punk noise rock skit that all kind of winds up within 2 minutes. Anyway, not wanting to divert from this list too much, but Slates, yes, is a pivotal release for me. Middle Mass, An Older Lover, etc. Leave the Capital. It's noisy and just as abrasive as Grotesque, but it's weirder and more adventurous in many ways, I think. A definite signpost of what was to come. And what was to come is next up at 5. I've got the classical from 1982's Hex Enduction, our album. The Fall's greatest LP, many would say yes. But Fall fans are a remarkably broad church, kneeling at the altar of many of the band's various incarnations. Saying that, I think most would place it very close to the top, even if it wasn't their own personal number 1. And with an opener like the classical, this album takes absolutely no prisoners. Huge, booming, blustery, everything turned up production. Those 2 drummers, Paul Hanley, Carl Burns, leathering the crap out of their kits in antagonistic unison. Craig Scanlon's guitar melodies here are amongst his greatest, and Steve Hanley's gigantic, prodding, bullying bass is immense. The one blot on this undroppable song, because it simply must be included on a list like this, is the use of an inexcusable, by any standards, modern or otherwise, racial epithet. I'm not going to argue that it should be given a pass because it's the Fall, but context and intent have to count for something. Is it shocking? Yes. Is it, here in this song, an expression meant to demean or portray a personal grievance or prejudice? I think definitely no. You can make your own minds up, but I would recommend checking out John Doran's 2019 piece for The Quietus about the use of that word in this very song. I will link to it below. It's very thorough and it's very, very well written. At 6, and from the same album, an odd one, I guess, because it's kind of 2 songs, but kind of not. I've got Winter. Winter, Hostile Maxi, closes side 1 of the album and is kind of resumed or reprised on the opening of side 2 in Winter 2. There's a kind of similar but opposite situation earlier on the album where the 2 tracks Fortress and Deer Park are presented as one. The difference here being that Fortress and Deer Park were almost always played as distinct and separate songs in concert, whereas Winter was usually just kind of the two parts were bridged into a single extended take of the song. It's a slowly building, almost plodding number that gradually reveals more of itself. Some killer, spindly guitar riffs that surface in the song's second half. And a twisted, only semi-passable narrative from Mark about a mad kid that he encounters in the street. Mark hints that this kid has been possessed by the spirit of a recovering alcoholic, but the shifting perspectives and non-linearity of the lyric leave this unresolved and very troubling. Yeah, a favourite of mine, this one. Just the combination of that slowly evolving music and the scattershot kind of cross-cut nature of the narrative is just magic. I'm not wishing to break my own ground rules, but the take of this song from a part of America they're in, the live album, is probably my favourite version of Winter, and you can also find that on the Rough Trade Totally Wired anthology. I've got a run of tracks from singles and EPs coming up next, starting with, at number 7, Fantastic Life. Yeah, originally the B-side of the Lie Dream of a Casino Soul single. I first encountered it on the Hit Priest and Camarads compilation, but you'll find it popping up on numerous other releases over the years. And this one should give pause to thought to those who seek to partition the Fall into, difficult and pop periods. It's just not that simple. Because Fantastic Life is a gloriously catchy, maddeningly repetitive pop song. This urgent single note keyboard line and the scratchy little toy tone guitar lines. It's a very jolly treatise, if you like, on living your best life, which in Mark's case takes in hard drinking, not working too hard, and just the combined experiences of a parade of oddballs that Mark has seemingly encountered through the years. Yeah, proof that you don't need to think too hard about the Fall on every track. Imagine on this one, Stereolab's French disco, but with more booze, and Frank Sidebottom singing the chorus. I love it. Next, at 8, I've got The Man Whose Head Expanded, another single, this one from June of 1983, and often bundled, as is the next song on this list, with its contemporaneous album, that being Perverted by Language. And what's to say, really, the Fall were able to knock out singles like this between albums without breaking a sweat. That's Smith, Scanlon, Hanley, Burns, Core, Mark Riley having jumped ship shortly before, proved to be a pretty solid lineup for the next few years. And I think that shows in the music of this period. There's a much more settled sound and production style. It seems as if everyone's roles are firmer, and Mark is kind of not baying for people's blood, it seems. The title of the song is kind of multi-purpose, being one, a nod to the work of writer Philip K. Dick. Mark was a big fan. And two, yeah, it's clearly a kind of a bit of a needle piece about the recently departed Mark Riley. Yeah, the pair had traded physical blows on tour in Australia and New Zealand, and a split was inevitable after that. Yeah, the salt was exchanged between the two Marks for a good few years after. Smith's live number, Hey Mark Riley, being a good example, and Mark Riley's own Jumper Clown single with the Creepers. In fact, there are a few structural elements to both The Man Whose Head Expanded and Jumper Clown which suggest that both of the bands, as they splintered, may have been adapting the same rehearsal material in isolation. Again, Mark's beef with plagiarism looms very large in the lyric. He sings, the soap opera writer would follow him around and use his jewels for TV primetime. The Man Whose Head Expanded. And with Riley clearly being, the owner of this titular expanded head. Yeah, the song is a pulsing, bleeping, insistent number with a cool slowdown section in the middle. And at 9, I've got the B-side of a single which I'm sure many fans would rather have on this list. That one would be Kick a Conspiracy. And this is a real mark of the high standards that the band were hitting here. I'm going to go for its flip side, for the B-side, namely Wings. Yeah, I do love me some Kick a Conspiracy, but it has a lot in common with number 10 on the list further on. I've just plumped for that one instead. But back to Wings, and maybe Craig Scanlon's greatest riff, I think, a playful little knot that seems to magically resolve into thin air when it's tugged. Yeah, it's like one of those spinning barber's poles that just seems to keep ascending upwards, meshing with a very simple kind of Motown-derived, four on the floor type beat. And there's very bubbly, kind of conversational bass line. And the repetition in this song provides the perfect substrate for one of, I think, Mark's clearest vocal performances and one of his most fantastical lyrics. Yeah, the song takes in magical wings, airline gremlins, accidental time travel, paradoxes, shifting realities. There are echoes of his H.P. Lovecraft fascination, of the kind of spatio-temporal weirdness of Philip K. Dick, even the cult sci-fi show Sapphire and Steel, which was a popular and very weird primetime TV hit at this time. Yeah, Mark picked up lyrical ideas from all over, books, films, theatre, art, TV, and he just ground them together into uniquely fascinating little puzzle box concepts like wings. The airline gremlins, for instance, most likely refers to the classic Twilight Zone episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, starring William Shatner. Anyway, moving on to number 10, and I've got Eat Yourself Fitter. I alluded to this sharing some DNA with Kicker Conspiracy earlier. It's what I hear anyway. They're both heavily drum-centric, with the most cursory of melodic elements bolted on. In fact, Eat Yourself Fitter ups the ante even further, I think. It's this dual drum-driven rockabilly shuffle, a hypnotic two-note bass and guitar motif, with these huge yawning dropouts filled with masked call and response vocal chants. And the lyric may take a popular all-brand advertising slogan of that period as its starting point, but it is just all over the shop. Numerous drug references, talking about taping TV shows on what would have been the then new video recorders, psychoanalysis, clubland confrontations, the microcomputer boom of the 80s. You could lose yourself in all this, but it's almost impervious, I think, to a simple interpretation, which is probably why it's become such a fan favourite. It offers almost limitless readings with no hope of resolution, yet very much like the musical backing underpinning it. At 11, another personal favourite in I Feel Voxish, and like Eat Yourself Fitter, drawn also from the 1983 Perverted by Language album. Yet this album marked Brix's first and quite a brief appearance on a full recording, having only met Mark in April of that year and the couple tying the knot in July. Consequently, she only has a small involvement with Perverted, and she doesn't really feature on Voxish at all. Yeah, a vicious, kind of slashing central guitar riff is kind of queasy and off-key, double-tracked with these sharp, stabbing harmonics, and borne aloft by a stone-cold classic Steve Hanley bass line. Yeah, this song is kind of a gliding, bruising, low-key classic for me, with a supremely threatening Mark lyric. He sings, "I've been sharpening a knife in the bathroom on a brick I got from the garden. No one will fuck with me again." Yeah, a chilly song. There's themes of drugs and cannibalism and hunger permeating it. But again, yeah, a big favourite of mine. Briefly, Brix. Yeah, we're entering Brix territory now, but as I've already stated, I think the poppier, more melodic elements in the Fall's music were there all along. I don't buy this, Brix, turned them pop take. If Brix added anything, it was just a little foofing, a little stylistic flourish, a bit of polish maybe. But mostly she just brought, a real shot of ambition, I think, to try and sell the Fall to an audience that they hadn't reached thus far. Which I think you can argue, ultimately they did achieve. I mean, getting the Fall, a band like the Fall, to a point where they got their own sticker in a smash hits album has to count for something, right? But that was yet to come. I'm getting ahead of myself. A pair of songs next, which I, for a long time, mistakenly thought were tracks from the Wonderful and Frightening World of the Fall album. But no, the widespread bundling of extras on cassette and CD versions of 80s albums, even more so on reissues, completely threw me. Yeah, the next two tracks are from EPs of the same period, which I happen to value just a little more over some of the original album tracks. That's not to devalue the album at all. Again, for a lot of Fall fans, this is one of their very, very best. At 12, I've got Oh Brother from the single of the same name, released in June of 1984. Yeah, a killer, bouncy piece of Fall pop music. Yeah, another Steve Hanley bass as lead masterclass with some big old drums and sugary la 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 backing vocals. The song's origins, however, can be traced right back to some of the band's earliest, gnarliest demos and live shows, where it was a kind of rollicking, Bo Diddley-ish rockabilly number. Check out the Live 77 compilation to hear it. And again, that thing of plagiarism. Genius steals. this song is actually a huge crib of the Blue Rondo's Little Baby, which is a little-known hit by 60s Joe Meek act who never really broke big. Whatever its origins, Mark has his way with it, and it's just a killer single from this period of The Fall. And backing that up, at number 13, I've got No Bulbs from the Call for Escape Route EP from October 1984. Yeah, a barreling 8-minute pop juggernaut, super catchy, a genuine sing-along chorus smothered with those crampy Brix single-note lead lines, the song dissolving into a smear of kind of motoric euphoria over its final half. Yeah, this is the Fall hooking their repetitive instincts up to a runaway train and, chugging off into a glorious sunset. Mark sings, in need of black strap, in need of white lamp, no belts in this flat, no lights in this dump. It's a marvellous song. Moving on now to another high watermark album for the group, which seamlessly fused their recent kind of pop experimentation, if you like, with their darker, more difficult instincts. Yeah, that album is 1985's This Nation's Saving Grace, another perennial contender for the best Fall album ever. And here, barring Brix's arrival, the first meaningful lineup change in years, with Paul Hanley leaving before recording began, reducing the Fall to its pre-1982 single drummer format. So at 14, I've got Spoilt Victorian Child. Yeah, stammering rockabilly riff riding this raucous pounding beat, with Smith whooping up a storm in a lyric inspired by the Victorian era hysteria surrounding the existence or otherwise of fairies. I think Mark's long-standing interest in the occult and supernatural fiction, witches, ghosts, Lovecraft, Faustian themes, would have led him here. But the fairy mythos, I think, touched on by one of his favourite authors, that'd be Arthur Machen in his classic 1904 short story The White People, a supremely creepy folk horror tale of witchcraft and wood nymphs. I think that may have been the big influence here. And next up from later on the album, at number 15, I've got Paintwork. And Paintwork I've included here to flag up, to represent, if you like, those looser, more experimental sound collage experiments which have littered the Fall's albums from day one. I happen to think that Paintwork is one of the most successful of these, taking a very simple drum machine pattern and a strummed acoustic guitar part as its starting point. It very quickly goes off-piste. Mark's lyric fading in and out. Taped verite kind of interludes, snatches of environmental and location noise. Flutes and keyboards washing in and out, backing vocals joining in, harmonizing over the song's fade. It's quite slight in some ways, but oddly lovely, and miles away from the often abrasive kind of tape experiments of dotted Fall releases over the years. There was another notable personnel change for the next album. That'd be 1986's band Sinister, with Simon Wollstonecroft replacing Carl Burns on drums for the majority of the recording. Yeah, there's a noticeably darker air permeating band Sinister, which I think is best exemplified by the number 16 entry here, that one being Living Too Late. This one was an odd choice maybe for a follow-up single to what was their biggest hit to date, that being the cover of Mr. Pharmacist, also here on this album. But I think this one is certainly much more representative of the feel of the record. It's a slow kind of throb of a song, incredibly moody and downbeat, punctured with odd, dissonant piano runs, Mark offering these shrill, panicked accompaniments. He sings, sometimes life is like a new bar, plastic seats, beer below par, food with no taste, music grates, I'm living too late. Yeah, for Mark, an uncharacteristically maudlin take on middle-age ennui and disillusionment. It's quite weird to hear Mark so lacking in bile on Living Too Late, but in this case, the music and the words, they mesh wonderfully. And continuing the prevailing trend of everything getting worse, but with an added shot of customary Mark E. Smith vinegar, I'm going for US 80s, 90s. Following a run in an extensive body search, I think, from US immigration on a trip to Boston, Mark decries the decline of the USA as, the land of the free. Musically speaking, Brix claims the band were, trying to cop a hip-hop feel with this track, and I do get that. To me, the beats bring to mind the kind of near-industrial sound of a band like Tackhead, the on-new artists of that period, formed by members of the house band at Sugar Hill Records. Either way, this track is a lot of fun. Yeah, another monster, glowering Hanley bass line. He's everywhere, working off those crunching beats with the guitars and the keyboard swooping and strafing in from altitude. Was this a portent of the more electronic direction the Fall would lean into on some of their 90s work? Yeah, decide for yourself. Anyway, I mentioned their big single success with Mr. Pharmacist. I will skip the big singles from 87 that did good business for them. So that's Hit the North. And There's a Ghost in My House. They both cracked the UK Top 40 singles chart. Instead, I'm going to fast forward to their next studio album. That's 1988, The Frenz Experiment. As well as my first full album, this was also the first album outing for additional keyboard player Marcia Schofield, a fellow countrywoman, alongside Brix. I think maybe she kind of helped to balance out the glam appeal of the band at the time and maybe help, turn the Fall into a bit less of a sausage party, pardon the phrase. This album, I'm sorely tempted to go for the patience testing Bremen Nacht here, but this song exists in so many different takes of differing lengths across different formats that one's just too much hassle to pin down. But it is a great kind of super repetitive headache of a song. Now, instead of that one at 18, I'm going for the polar opposite with the drifting, dreamy opening track, Frenz. Anchored by a kind of an inkblot, slow-mo hooky, if you like, bass line from Steve Hanley, and a very subdued, tick-tocking, rim-heavy drum pattern from Psy. It's maybe the simplest, the least obtuse lyric that Mark ever wrote. He sings, "My friends ain't enough for one hand. My friends don't amount to one hand, one hand." And that is pretty much it. Stretched out, minor variations in the wording, with the same sentiment for the next 3.5 minutes. It's not a kind of poppy keyboard pop stomper. It's not some kind of sloppy rockabilly number. It's not a worked up rant. It's not some kind of krautrock monster. It's a very introspective meditation on the precious nature of friendship and how you can often boil down your true friends to just a handful. I think this kind of reflects that at the time they were at their most famous in terms of mainstream success, and Mark was finding himself increasingly surrounded by hangers-on. As an aside, people often flag up Bill Is Dead or Edinburgh Man, some Fall songs from the 90s, as the ones where Mark very uncharacteristically kind of, opens up. I think Frenz beats both those by a couple of years, and whilst being kind of oddly menacing, it's infinitely sadder and more honest and strangely touching. On note, the final two tracks on this list, both from 1988's I Am Kurious Oranj album, the fruits of a collaboration with Michael Clarke's dance company, the soundtrack, if you like, to the ballet of the same name. Mark and Brix would separate within a year of this album, and the rancor between them was enough to result in Mark denying writing credits to Brix for this album, despite Steve Hanley going on record stating that the bulk of the Kurious Oranj material was his and Brix' work. It was a very sad situation, really, but one that oddly enough resulted in, I think, a fantastic Fall album, which gets mystifyingly mixed retrospective reviews. Anyway, my choices. First up, I'll go for, at 19, Cab It Up. Breakneck music box powered thrill ride. It's all this throaty bass, manic strumming, and that tinkly keyboard icing to top it all off. Mark squealing and taunting, bothering, breaking out the megaphone. It's great stuff. I think it's all you could ask for from, prime Brix period Fall. There are shout outs in the song to Michael Clarke in the lyric, Michael, and a general air of, ribbing the metropolitan arty types, jumping into cabs willy-nilly, always off to events. And finally, to close this 20, a musical callback to earlier in the decade. Hex Enduction now's Hip Priest gets the full rewrite in the form of, at 20, Big New Prince. An absolute stormer, ditching the whispered, kind of twitchy mood swings of the original in favour of a relentlessly compact riff that is hammered into the dirt and marched on until it is no more. A totalitarian, glam-derived blitzkrieg. There's a glitter beat in there, I'm sure. That, make no bones about it, is nothing to do with William of Orange. And this one's all about Mark E. Smith. That lyric, in case you missed it, check the record, check the record, check the guy's track record, check the record, check the guy's rock record. He is not appreciated. Personal anecdote, my first Fall gig was at the Reading Festival 1990. They were playing just before the Pixies headline slot. And when the Pixies got on stage, Kim Deal's first words, wow, the Fall were great, weren't they? She wasn't wrong. I loved the Pixies then. The Fall utterly stole their thunder. They wiped them off the stage. I think it's no coincidence that the current lineup of the Pixies regularly cover Big New Prince live. Once again, genius steals. Deep breath, and that is that. It took me 4 drafts to get this right, so I really hope you've enjoyed it. Fall fans, okay, I'm listening. Omissions, yeah. The Dragnet album, it's a great, murky sounding Mark Riley era Fall recording, which has picked up a lot of new fans after years of being underappreciated and unavailable. It's not for new listeners, I'd say. But the brave out there will be rewarded. Yeah, Spectre versus Rector from Dragnet is a quite extraordinary piece of music, but maybe not for this list. The Room to Live album. Yeah, it has a few very good tracks, Hard Life in the Country being one, but it's a decidedly mixed bag, so nothing made it in here. And to reiterate, just in case you missed it, these selections are aimed at bringing the uninitiated into the fold. I've been listening to this band for 35 years. I have friends who I share very, very strong musical bonds with. Our tastes are intrinsically linked, going back that far. And many of them still do not get the Fall. I would urge you, do try, because once you're in, there's an awful lot to love. As I mentioned before, yeah, there are links in the description below to some of the resources that I've referenced. In particular, the annotated Fall website is an absolute goldmine. Do check that out. There's also a link to a Spotify playlist featuring every track on this list. And of course, I'm not done with the Fall. Yeah, part 2 will follow sometime. Just watch this space. Anyway, I'll stop now. If you have enjoyed the video, yeah, please feel free to show your appreciation in all the usual ways. And in the meantime, yeah, I'll see you soon. You take care. Bye for now.